Hey, what's going on? I'm a legal mist, and today I'm going to be talking to you about Hydra Clash and how to make sure you can maximize your points to get the highest chest. Let's get right into it. The first thing that we want to talk about with Hydra Clash specifically in mind is what chest you're trying to go for and how you can best achieve it. I'll use myself as an example because maybe 2 months ago I was trying to figure out how to get back into Hydra Clash. I took some time off of Raid for personal reasons, and when I jumped back into the game, I realized that Hydra Clash needed me to change my teams up so that I could deal as much damage in total to the Hydra. I had one key teams for all hard, brutal, and nightmare, but I wasn't able to do much more than just the one key. The thing that makes hard Hydra really interesting is depending on the level of gear and the champions on your account, this is where the majority of your damage is going to come. Just like how people built corpulent cadaver teams or teams with Shuzen and Trunda, you're going to be able to go in and probably ignore a lot of the Hydra mechanics that are very devastating on brutal or hard. Because we're able to keep our accuracy and resistance slightly lower, we're able to build our champions with a little more damage. A lot of people didn't realize that you can almost negate a lot of the Hydra factors if you just kill the heads. I know it sounds kind of stupid, but if you have enough damage, which you should be able to do if you have endgame gear, you'll be able to effectively take out half or more of a Hydra head in one hit. A champion like Turvold is even able to one-shot the Head of Mischief, which is able to reduce the turn meter of other heads that are alive, effectively being a net positive for your team whenever the Head of Mischief comes out. The whole purpose behind your hard Hydra team should be getting all of your damage dealers as much damage as possible while having some of the other heads either completely dealt with by other champions or partially dealt with by a champion that's able to provide something else. You'll notice for a team like this, I have my champions like Mithrala, Lydia, and Krisk in these teams instead of my Nightmare or my Brutal teams. It goes back to the idea that those champions are more valuable to me in teams like this, where I'm able to bump my numbers exponentially compared to a team like Nightmare. If I'm able to do 90 million damage on a Nightmare team, but I bring in Krisk and I'm able to do 95 million damage, it's not as beneficial to me than if I brought him in on my hard Hydra team and I was able to do 150 million damage before, but now I'm able to do 200 million. So whenever you're thinking about slotting different champions into different difficulties, you always want to make sure that you're getting the most overall damage for your account. Again, this only applies if you're trying to get above the 1 key damage to help your Hydra Clash team. This is a perfect example of what I mean by making sure that we bring in better champions for our hard team than our brutal. For Shamel, I definitely could have brought him in on my brutal team and gotten an increase in my damage, but having him on my hard team really effectively has the ability to increase my damage by a significant amount. Not only am I getting my rabbit to go faster because we can just target the Head of Torment and get that extra fear proc, which means that the rabbit goes more, but I can also bring him in and have him do significant damage to heads like the Head of Mischief. Another thing to consider when you're talking about hard Hydra and getting really high damage teams is the fact that you're going to hit the turn limit. If you know your team is strong enough to hit the turn limit, then you're going to want to change some of the speeds of some of your champions. For my account, during the free regear, I had my Krisk at 230 speed before. Last week, I was able to go in and do about 330 million damage on hard Hydra. I decided I wanted to increase my numbers, so I took my Lydia and my Krisk and gave them both about 20 extra speed because I had improved gear since the last time I geared them. After switching up their builds, I reran my Hydra team and I was able to only get about 295 to 300 million damage. I thought increasing the speed on my Krisk would help me deal with the provoke head more, but in fact, it just took up more turns on my team and I actually wasn't getting as much damage because my damage dealers didn't get as many turns. The same thing happened with my Lydia. My thought process was that Lydia was going to have more speed, which meant more decreased defense and weaken, but in reality, it just reduced my damage because my champions weren't getting enough turns to deal significant amounts of damage. Since then, I dropped my Krisk to about 250 speed instead of 270 or 280 where I had him, and my Lydia went from about 312 speed all the way down to about 250. The other thing that I did with my Lydia was I put her in a hex set instead of having her with extra damage. Getting the hex set on Lydia is really nice because she has that AoE attack, and that means our overall damage is going to be increased. The other thing to think about, because I have Mithrala in this team, I already have a hex champion, but in reality, if I have hex on an enemy and then we kill him, I'm not going to have hex on him when he's actually dead, so I'm not going to get the increase in damage if we hit another head. So having 2 champions that are able to provide hex for our team can really increase our damage. So when you're building a hard team, make sure that your support champions are fast enough to get their job done, but not so fast that they're taking too many extra turns. For your damage dealers, you still want them to be fast, so that way you can cycle through your abilities quickly and then overlap the Hydra heads so that you can kill them before they get anything started. But you also want to make sure that they have enough survivability if you don't have any healers. My claymate Roughneck has an excellent team for his hard team. Let me know if you're interested in seeing the Ruel. I have a showcase video that I've started but I haven't finished, so I can definitely show that off if you guys are interested. We can see for this team, again, we have our Hex champion in Ruel, but we also have Suzerain in a Hex set, which provides us extra Hex. And you can see he's not going to do 103 million damage typically, so the Hex set is really pulling its own weight. Having Wukong in a damage build is also an excellent way to get increased damage on your hard Hydra team, while having a champion that's able to remove buffs and place block debuffs. His team is actually able to go in and not have a provoker because Razelvarg's built in a nice provoke set. Teams like this really showcase that you can bring in champions that are able to do so much damage that you don't really have to deal with the mechanics of most of the Hydra heads. For my Brutal team, I'm pretty much just trying to get a 1 key, and however much extra damage I get on top of that is great. The idea behind this team, I have my block buffs, I have my provoke, I have my heals, and I have my damage from Artak and Husk. This team can average about 50 to 60 million on auto, which is pretty good, but it's definitely not the best team that I can build. My Artak doesn't even have War Master because I use him in Ice Golem. The whole purpose of this team is to make sure I get 1 key damage and any extra damage I can get. There's a lot of room for my account personally to improve my Brutal scores, but right now I'm trying to improve my hard more than my Brutal. While it may seem like a really weird thing to do, you want to try and save up for any guaranteed champion events that they have in the future. On my Nightmare Hydra team, which averages about 80 million a key on full auto, but can do as much as 130 million, there's 3 or 4 champions that were all guaranteed. My Michinaki, my Nekmothar, and my Sham all came from guaranteed events. On top of that, Molly was either a fragment or a fusion, and then Pinthroy was also a guaranteed event that I didn't go for, unfortunately. The last remaining champion is a max HP nuker in Husk, who is pretty easy to get if you've been playing for a significant amount of time. But realistically, he can be slotted in with any champion that does max HP or is just a damage dealer. This team on Nightmare Hydra can average about 80 million damage, which equates to about 320 million Hydra Clash points. That comes out to almost half the points that you need, and we still have our Brutals and hard teams that we can utilize. Our Nightmare teams are the ones that we're trying to get the most damage possible with some of our best champions, but not necessarily our biggest damage dealers. This team, I think, is the most important to make sure that we have every single piece that we would need. Of course, my clanmates have ridiculous accounts, so double Acrizia teams might not necessarily fit the bill, but when we look at teams like mine, we can see that I'm pretty much checking the box for everything that you would want. This team consists of consistent provokes, a Hex champion, a decreased defense champion, an increased speed and a decreased speed, as well as damage, block buffs, some heals, and a way to deal with the Fear Head. Whenever you're building a classical Hydra team, and I say classical in the sense that your team is very well-rounded for any of the individual heads, you want to make sure that you're able to deal with the provokes that are coming. You want to be able to deal with any of the fears that might be coming. You want to be able to stop your buffs from getting stolen and spread, as well as your turn meter. You want to make sure that you can get any of your champions that are eaten out, and you want to make sure that your team survives. If you're able to do those 5 things, your team should be able to do 1 key damage on all of the Hydra difficulties. Now, whatever way you deal with all of that is pretty much up to you, but there's been a couple proven methods to make sure that you have the most success. When I say stay alive, there's a couple factors that kind of go into something like that. When we deal with the Head of Decay, the most obvious thing to do is to bring in a provoker so that it can't use its abilities. Someone like Molly in this team is able to keep the provoke up just about 100% of the time, so I don't need to bring in anyone else for that. For the Fear Head, Sham is the best champion to be able to deal with that and also provide your team with some additional support by increasing the turn meter. To deal with the buffs getting stolen and then spread, you want to have a Mischief tank, so someone that's really high in resistance. To have enough damage to make sure that your champions get out, you want to have at least 2 people that can do enough damage to burst down whatever heads stole your champion. And to stay alive, that involves a lot of different roles that some champions might have, such as Archbishop Pinthroy giving us a heal and a shield, and a champion like Molly who provides us with a revive in case anyone dies. You'll notice that I didn't talk about specific heads like Head of Wrath or the Head of Blight that puts on the Poison Cloud. The reason for not talking about heads like that is because we want to talk about fundamentally what we're trying to do. When we're putting up something like block buffs, that's helping us deal with a couple different things, such as staying alive, because the Head of Wrath won't get the increased attack, or the reflect damage, which has been known to kill my Husk once or twice. It'll also stop putting up the Poison Cloud, so that we only do weak hits, which effectively helps our team deal enough damage to get champions out whenever they're consumed. My Nightmare team, primarily, is trying to get as much damage with as good of champions that I can have that are able to provide overall general support. This team isn't able to go in and do 500 million damage on a difficulty like hard, but it's able to come in and give me a very good chunk of my Hydra Clash points. When we talk about our brutal and hard teams, that kind of situation really changes what type of team I'm trying to build. Using these strategies, I'm able to get over 1 billion damage on my account, and I don't have any of the top damage dealers for Hydra. If you guys feel like you can't get any extra damage out of your Hydra teams, don't worry. The biggest thing you can do for your account is make sure that you keep progressing in slow increments rather than just trying to burst through everything and get burnt out in the game. My account 6 months ago wasn't able to do over 100 million on any difficulty of Hydra. Since then, I've been able to go in and craft new teams, and with the help of my clanmates, we're able to consistently do over 1 billion damage each. While some teams, like the double Yumiko Trunda teams, are always going to be better, these teams are able to go in and help your clan deal as much damage to the Hydra as possible and help you increase your chances of getting those nice rewards.